Hi, my name is Hannah Simpson, and I am so excited to walk you guys through a fun lab model making activity today to do with our lesson that we just completed. So before I tell you what this activity is actually about, I'm going to ask you to guess based on this piece of paper right here. As you can see, we have 4 different sections, and I want you to take this opportunity to pause the video and think back to our lesson today. What did we learn about? That there are 4 categories or 4 different types of this specific concept. So once you've taken a moment to pause and think about it, I will go ahead and tell you what we are doing today. So we are going to make a model of the 4 different types of precipitation. Now, I actually have one that I prepared ahead of time so that we can see what we're going to be doing. I will grab that. So here it is. So as you can see in each model, we have a cloud. We have our model showing us what is occurring from that cloud. We have the name of the type of precipitation, and we're going to identify each one as a liquid or a solid. So we're going to begin by gathering our supplies. You should have a container of cotton balls. You will need 4 cotton balls per cloud. And then you should have some little pieces of paper that are rolled up into little balls. You should have some Q-tips that are cut in half, some glue, a Sharpie, a pen, and 2 different shades of blue markers. So we're going to begin by going into each section and making our cloud so that we have a base to work with. You'll want to do this at the very top of your section so that you have plenty of room below to write our information about each type. So I'm going to take 4 cotton balls here, and I'll show you. You're going to stick 3 on the bottom like this, and then 1 at the top, and you really want to apply some pressure so that it stays on there, and you have your cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and as quickly as I can, make the rest of my clouds. And while we're doing this, I want you to think about how even though all of these types of precipitation do come from clouds, what about the weather needs to be different in order for these different types to occur? For example, for snow to occur, what does the weather need to be like outside? Pause and think. So do we think it needs to be sunny? Does it need to be hot? Does it need to be cold? So the answer with snow is that it needs to be cold outside, as we learned in our lesson. In order for the snow to form, it has to be a certain temperature, because otherwise it would just be rain, right? So we have our 4 clouds here. Now I want you to think, as we're getting ready to fill out this first section right here, out of our 4 types of precipitation, there is 1 that is in a different category than the other 3. And I briefly mentioned it earlier in this video, and we discussed it in detail during our class. During our lesson, we actually played a game that involved classifying each type based on this criteria. So take a moment and pause and think about it. So the answer here that I'm looking for is there is 1 type of liquid precipitation, and the other 3 of the 4 types are solids. So let's go ahead and start with our liquid type of precipitation. So which type of the 4 that we discussed? So we have rain, we have sleet, we have hail, and we have snow. Of these, which one is the liquid? Go ahead and pause and think about it. And when you have your answer, come back. So the answer that we're looking for here is rain. So before we go in and draw our raindrops, we're gonna go to this bottom, it'll be the bottom left. If the paper is facing you, it'll be the top left square with the cloud. And inside that square, we're going to go to the bottom left side with our Sharpie. We're going to print very carefully the type of precipitation. So for this one, that will be rain. And then we're going to write whether this is a solid or liquid, which, as we discussed, this is a liquid. So this is what it should look like so far. As you can see, it might be backwards for you guys, but it says rain, liquid. Now go ahead and grab the darker of your two markers, and you can be creative here, but what we want to represent with this is the act of rain. So I'm just drawing some raindrops, like a nice teardrop shape. You can draw as many as you want. You can make them go whatever direction you want as long as they're generally heading down. So we have finished one of the 4 squares. So for the remaining 3, they are all solids. There's not really any particular order that I'm looking to go with this. I'm just going to go off of how I went with my example here that I made. So our first of the 3 that we're going to go with is sleet. So I want you to go ahead and write just like we did with the rain. We're gonna write the word sleet. And for this one, it will be a solid. And while we're at it, we can go to the next one, the bottom left, and write snow. And that is a solid. And then our final square will be hail. And that is also a solid. So at this point, we're done with this marker here. And we have our 4 types written. So we're going to start with sleet to make our representation. So in this little container here, I don't know if you can see, but I have these little Q-tips, I dropped one, that I cut off the edges to make them shorter. We're going to grab our glue and very carefully take a Q-tip piece and apply some glue from the tip all the way down to the bud, and then gently press down here so that you can see a little representation of sleet coming out of the cloud. So go ahead and do as many as you would like. I would recommend doing, 3 or 5, and you can stagger them at different heights to really showcase the sleet coming out. And as we learned in our lesson, sleet is also known as what? Go ahead and pause the video and think about it. So the answer we're looking for here is freezing rain. Think about, why do you think sleet is also known as freezing rain? What happens within the cloud or outside of the cloud that could result in people having this name for this type of precipitation? So go ahead and think about that while we finish this up. This is what mine looks like. So what I'm trying to get you to think about here with the sleet or the freezing rain is that the water does not freeze inside of the cloud, as we learned in our lesson, the same way that it does with snow. So it actually exits the cloud as rain, but then freezes after it's exited the cloud before it reaches the ground. So it creates these little frozen balls of ice that are smaller than hail. So that is why sleet is also known as freezing rain. So our next section here is one that you are probably more familiar with than sleet or hail, and that is snow. Here in Georgia, We don't always get snow. It depends on where you live within the state. We actually did get snow in Atlanta this past year. So it is possible. But snow is cold, as we discussed earlier in this lesson. So in order for snow to occur, it's not going to be summer, right? It's going to be winter, and it needs to be somewhere that is very cold. For example, Florida, where I grew up, even though the temperature does get cooler in the winter, it very, very, very rarely gets cold enough for snow to occur. It's a very specific condition, as we learned in our lesson, similar to what causes sleet, but it's different in one specific way. Can you pause your video and think about what is the difference between sleet or freezing rain and snow? Once you are ready, come back. So the difference here is really about whether or not the freezing of the water occurs inside or outside of the cloud, right? So the snow is exiting the cloud already frozen, whereas the sleet or freezing rain, as we just discussed, freezes after it leaves the cloud. So let's go ahead and work on our snow. I'm taking this thin marker or pen here and drawing these little asterisk shapes. Now what you can do to get creative is you can go in after you've drawn that type of shape and you can add extra line work there. And what I like to do when I'm doing this is to go in and make each one a little bit different, because as we learned in our lesson, these snowflakes are all different in their own ways. So I have 4 here. I'm going to add one more just because, why not, you know? So once you have your snowflakes drawn with that black pen, we're gonna take the lighter of the 2 blues. And this is really just for fun, just to demonstrate, similar to how we used blue for the liquid there, that this is also a type of liquid, it's frozen. So we're gonna go in and just kind of trace over our snowflakes to kind of highlight them in the blue, as you can see I did there. And these snowflakes do not have to be perfect, because similar to people, they are different in their own ways, and each one is uniquely beautiful and special, right? All right, so we have our first 3 sections here done. So we're gonna go ahead and work on our hail section. Now, hail may be, out of the 4, at least for me, is the one that I've experienced the least, right? So rain, sleet, snow, I feel like we observe a lot more than hail. So similar to sleet, it takes the shape of these frozen balls of ice, right? But hail, if you remember from the pictures that we used in our lesson, can be it can range a lot in the size, right? So I don't know if you remember the example, but go ahead and pause the video and think about the example that we used, how small it can be and how large it can get. So your answer might be a little different depending on maybe what you remember from the lesson or kind of how you interpreted it. But hail can be as small as a quarter, it can be as small as a coin, or it can get as large as a softball. So these balls of ice can be a lot more damaging, right, than just rain alone. With rain, as we've learned, it's often accompanied by lightning, thunder, wind, things like that, that can cause damage, especially when rain is involved in a tropical storm or a hurricane or something like that. But with hail, the actual hail balls can puncture through glass. It can break car windows. If they hit you on the head, it wouldn't feel very good. So it's a fascinating type of weather, that it doesn't necessarily come from the storm, the damage that it can cause, but it's actually the type of precipitation that can cause the damage. So that is just me being fascinated by weather, because I think the science of weather is cool, and hopefully by the end of this activity you'll think so as well. So I'm taking the glue for this section, and you're gonna make little dots. Be careful, you don't need a lot here, just the tiniest little, you barely have to squeeze, and you're just gonna make dots in different places. And keep in mind that is where your hail balls are going to be placed. So now we're gonna take those little crumpled up pieces of paper and just carefully place them down onto those little dots of glue. You can make as many or as little as you want. You can put them in whatever pattern you want, and that's what's really fun about this lab activity. Everyone's is going to look different, right? Okay. So you want to be careful and let these dry before you go trying to pick them up, because it might not be the most stable right now. But you can see this is the finished product. Oh, yep, there goes one. It's dangling. So this is our completed lab, and now you have a neat little model that showcases the 4 different types of precipitation that we learned about. And you have these nice little fluffy clouds that I think are adorable. So we'll go ahead and put that to the side, and as we begin cleaning up our supplies here, I want to direct you to think back to our learning target at the very beginning of our lesson regarding the 4 different types of precipitation and whether they are solids or liquids, right? So our learning target for today was I can identify the 4 different types of precipitation and distinguish between whether they are a solid or a liquid. So as we can see when we're looking at our model, the first thing we can see in the bottom left corner of each square is the type of precipitation. And then with the model, we can see the raindrops, the sleet, the snowflakes, and the hail. So we know the name, and we have a representation to remind us of what that type looks like. And then we also have whether each type is a liquid or a solid. So this is actually a great tool to use as you are still familiarizing yourself with these 4 different types. And if you're struggling to remember whether rain is a solid or a liquid, or snow is a solid or a liquid, which snow in particular can be a little confusing because it does melt rather easily in Georgia. It can turn into liquid pretty quickly, right? So this is a great way to bring yourself back to that learning target and make sure that you are not getting confused, right? So that is everything that I have for today. I hope you guys had a wonderful time making this with me, and this is a really great activity that can be used for the unit that I used this for. I just totally blanked out, oh my gosh.